Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Birth of a Criminal, the podcast where we explore the darkest corner of human nature and unravel the stories that leave us questioning the world around us. I'm your host, V, and each week we'll delve into the lives of individuals who, for some reason or something often complex or deeply rooted, have crossed the line into criminal behavior. So while listening to these stories, I want you to be aware that it can often be about a life that was stolen or lives that were stolen, and that can be triggering. So please stop when you need to. Mental health is very important. So grab your tea, grab your coffee, grab your latte. In my case, it's a mocha, and let's get started. Thanks for joining me. A horrifying murder unfolded on the quiet Upper West Side apartment in New York City. The crime sent ripples of grief and disbelief through the close-knit community and beyond, the whole nation really. Neighbors and strangers alike were left grappling with the horror of death, searching for answers on how a tragedy like this could have happened. Yoselin Ortega was born in Santiago de los Calabros, Dominican Republic, in 1962. Ortega grew up in a large, close-knit family in a community where life was often challenging but filled with strong family bonds. Her family was really close. The kids shared everything. Ortega's early days were marked with a life of modest means. She didn't come from very much, typical of many of the families in the region. However, her upbringing in the Dominican Republic appeared to instill a sense of resilience and a deep connection to her family, who were an integral part of her life even today. In the early 2000s, Ortega came to the United States in search of a better opportunity, like most immigrants. She left her family behind and left her child behind, hoping that she could build a life in New York City and can help those who were abroad. The transition was very difficult for her, as she faced the unusual challenges of adjusting to a new culture, learning English, and finding stable employment. She worked in a doll factory at first, and then another factory where she printed books before landing a job in the nanny world, as a nanny, of course. With all this, Ortega remained committed to supporting her family back in the DR, often sending money home to help her relatives. Ortega's life in New York was centered around her work as a nanny, a job she took on to provide for her teenage son, who hopefully could join her in the United States. Her reputation as a caregiver grew within the Upper West Side community, where she was seen as a reliable and experienced nanny. It was through word of mouth that she was eventually introduced to the Krim family. Marina and Kevin Krim, the parents of 3 young children, were deeply committed to providing a nurturing and enriched environment for their kids. Marina, a former magazine editor and stay-at-home mom, dedicated herself to raising her children with creativity, love, and warmth. Kevin Krim, a successful executive at CNBC, balanced his demanding career with a deep devotion to his family. Together, they created a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a really amazing and bright future. Lucia, affectionately known as Lulu, is the eldest of the 3 children. She is 6. She's bright and spirited child who loved ballet, art, and playing with her siblings. Lulu and Nessie, who both had curious mind, Nessie is 3, and a joyful personality that endeared them to everyone who knew them. The sisters loved playing together, and they are very protective of their 2-year-old brother Leo, who is lively and a cheerful toddler. He is known for his infectious smile and playful bond that he shared with his big sisters. The Krims were an active part of the community, engaging in various activities and forming close bonds with neighbors and friends. Marina often documented their family's life through a blog, sharing the joys and the milestones of her children. It was clear from her writing and photos that the Krims cherished their time together, whether it was on trips to the park, visiting museums, or simply enjoying each other's company at home. They were a family who thrived on connection, both with each other and with the world around them. In 2010, Marina and Kevin, when they were interested in a nanny, was introduced to Ortega. Ortega's sister had introduced her, and they went as far as traveling to the DR to meet Ortega's family before hiring her. They really wanted her to feel like she was an extension of their parenting team and part of their family. After the trip, they hired Ortega to care for Lulu, Leo, and Nessie. Yazan Ortega played a significant role in the daily routines, helping to manage the children's schedules and care. Ortega was deeply involved in the children's lives. She was picking them up from school, prepping their meals, and engaged in activities and playtime. In the beginning of her employment, Ortega developed a seemingly close bond with the children and the Krim family. However, there were underlying issues that gradually began to surface. Ortega was struggling with personal and financial difficulties. 6 months before this tragedy, Ortega brought her son up from the DR and enrolled him in an expensive private school in New York City. Ortega's brother mentioned that he would help with the initial tuition, but Ortega would have to take care of the ongoing cost of the private school. Also, the owners of the apartment that she was renting from wanted it back. This forced Ortega and her son to move in with her sister in Hamilton Heights. Also, Ortega was reported to be under pressure to send money back to the family in DR, a responsibility that really started to weigh on her. It was obvious to Ortega that she was not making enough money to meet her financial obligations, which significantly contributed to her stress and anxiety. Ortega's behavior began to change to those around her. She appeared increasingly withdrawn and tired. Marina Krim noticed Ortega was losing weight. Ortega even asked Marina if she could take on additional work to earn more money, which Marina agreed to by offering her some more hours cleaning the apartment. However, these measures were not enough to alleviate Ortega's mounting financial issues. A friend even mentioned that Ortega had apparently started seeing a psychiatrist because she was feeling crazy. The cracks in her emotion and mental state were widening, but no one had or could predict what happened next. In the days leading up to the fateful Thursday, Marina's husband, Kevin Krim, was away on a business trip in California, and the family was really looking forward to his return over the weekend. But there were subtle signs concerning Ortega that she was struggling a little bit more than usual. She had been visibly stressed out and uncharacteristically quiet, exhibiting signs of fatigue and emotional strain. Ortega had also recently returned from a trip to the Dominican Republic. This trip had left her in significant financial strain, and she had asked Marina for more hours to cover her expenses. This afternoon, on this Thursday, October 12th, Marina took Nessie to a swimming lesson, planning to meet up with Ortega, Lucia, and Leo afterwards. The plan was for the two groups to reunite at Lulu's dance class, but when Marina arrived at the dance studio and found that the other two kids weren't there, she began to worry. She called and texted Ortega, but there was no answer. Marina hurried back to the apartment, growing more and more anxious with each passing moment. When Marina arrived home, it was eerily quiet and dark in the apartment. She walked in, calling out her children's name. At the end of a dark hallway, she sees a crack of light coming from a bathroom. Then she cautiously proceeds and enters the bathroom. She discovers the lifeless body of her two children in the bathtub. She knew Lucia wasn't here because Lucia's eyes was open and she was bloody. Lucia and Leo had been brutally stabbed multiple times. Standing nearby was Ortega, covered in blood, eyes wide and buggy. She had stabbed the children to death and placed them in a bathtub. Marina, staring at Ortega, was in a frozen state of shock. When the cry from Nessa, because she was next to her, broke the silence, at that very moment when Ortega heard her cries is when she attempted to take her life by stabbing herself in the neck. Marina's screams, as anyone can imagine, echoed through the apartment building, alerting neighbors who immediately called 911. The emergency response was swift, and tragically, there was nothing they could do to save Lucia and Leo. First responders quickly apprehended Ortega, who was rushed to the hospital to treat her self-inflicted wounds. She was put into a medically induced coma and awoke 2 days later. The aftermath of the crime was chaotic and devastating. News of the tragedy quickly spread through the Upper West Side and beyond. As police and emergency services secured the crime scene, Marina Krim, in shock and overwhelmed with grief, was escorted away by authorities and comforted by friends and family who rushed to her side. And if you remember, the dad wasn't there. Kevin Krim, who was still in California at the time, received the news while in transit and immediately flew back to New York City. As investigations began to piece together the details of what happened, the Krim family and those who had known them were left to mourn an unimaginable loss of two beautiful and innocent children, and to begin the long and painful journey of seeking justice for Lulu and Leo. In the immediate aftermath of this crime, the NYPD launched an extensive investigation to piece together the events that led to the tragic death of Lucia and Leo Krim. The crime scene was meticulously processed, with investigators collecting the evidence and documenting the horrific scene that had unfolded in the apartment on the Upper West Side. The initial priority was to ensure the safety of the surviving family members and to get Yoselin Ortega, who had been transported to the hospital because of her self-inflicted injuries. Detectives began their investigation by interviewing Ortega at the hospital. Although her initial statements were inconsistent and confusing, due to her injuries and mental state, Ortega's ability to provide coherent answers were compromised. Over time, however, she then began giving varying explanations to her actions, ranging from, oh, she was overwhelmed and overworked, to insinuating that she was possessed by malevolent forces. In one account of her communication, though, she did say she placed the blame on the parents, complaining about how she had to do everything and take care of the kids and clean the house. None of her statements provided a clear and real rational reason to why she did what she did. The investigation also involved interviews with the Ortega family members, both in the United States and in the Dominican Republic, to gain insight on her background and mental health history. Her relatives described a woman who had been under increased stress and financial strain in the months leading to the crime. They painted a picture of someone who felt isolated and burdened by her responsibilities, yet no one had anticipated that she was capable of the violence. The Krim family was also interviewed by the detectives, a process that was emotionally taxing. You can imagine, given the grief. Marina and Kevin Krim provided crucial information about their relationship with Ortega, including details about her recent behavior and any changes that had been noticed. They described Ortega as someone who had been a part of their lives for over 2 years, a woman they had trusted implicitly with the care of their children. The Krim's testimony highlighted the profound betrayal they felt as they struggled to understand how someone they considered as part of their family could commit such a crime. As the investigations unfolded, detectives discovered that Ortega had been facing significant financial difficulties and was deeply in debt. They also discovered that Ortega didn't have any real childcare experience. When Marina had asked Ortega for a reference, she provided her with the contact information of Gladys Garcia and another niece named Jacqueline Severino. When the Krims had emailed her, Jacqueline, about her time with Ortega, she had sent a letter describing Ortega as this woman who had taken care of her son and was taking care of her son Ariel for 2 years. The letter was incredibly detailed and all lies. Despite uncovering all this, investigators still struggle to explain the sheer brutality of the murders. The NYPD also consulted mental health professionals to assess Ortega's psychological state, both at the time of the crime and during the investigation. These assessments would later play a crucial role during the trial, as the defense sought to argue that Ortega was not in her right mind and was mentally ill when she committed the murder. In the wake of this unimaginable tragedy that befell the Krim family, Marina and Kevin were left to navigate a world that had been shattered. The Krims channeled their grief into a constructive and meaningful cause. They established the Lulu and Leo Fund, a charitable organization dedicated to fostering creative education for disadvantaged children. Through these initiatives, Marina and Kevin sought to create a legacy for their children that would inspire and uplift other children. In August of 2018, the Lulu and Leo law was signed by Governor Cuomo. This law makes it illegal to knowingly misrepresent the experience and qualifications of an individual who works in childcare. Meaning, if you are a nanny, you cannot give false information about your experience. I honestly would love this law to be adopted nationwide and not just in New York City or New York State. When Kevin Krim was signing the bill, he said, "Hide the woman who murdered our children based on deliberate set of lies. Thanks to Governor Cuomo's support and the hard work of sponsors, Assemblyman Otis, Senator Lanza, and their co-sponsors, there is now a strong deterrent to this kind of deception. I have created 2 links below for you guys to definitely visit. And if you can, donate to the Lulu and Leo Fund and review the Lulu and Leo law. Also, in 2016, 6 years after the death of the Krim children, Yazlin Ortega was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her trial, which drew significant media attention, ended with a resounding rejection of the defense argument that she was mentally ill at the time of the murders. The defense had called witnesses to testify that she had a history of depression and that she was suffering mentally, but the jury saw through it. The jury found that Ortega had committed the acts with intent and that she was fully aware of her actions. Ortega is currently serving her life sentence in a New York State prison. Since her conviction, she's remained out of the public eye with a few updates of her life behind bars. She files appeals that have all been denied. The media attention that has once surrounded her has largely faded, but the impact of her actions continue to resonate deeply with those who follow the case. Like me, I will never let anyone forget this case. While the last case that you saw, episode 1, was the first document or docuseries I've ever seen, this case was the first one I ever truly followed. At the time, I myself was a nanny on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. The nanny community was shocked into silence. No one can imagine that a nanny, an individual that honestly often feels like the third parent, would kill their charges. Like, it's unheard of. Also, it really did change the nanny vetting process and how people hired their nannies. Gone was the day where if someone's like, yay, I'm really good with kids, you would just hire them. It increased the vetting and the background checks that people would have for the childcare providers that they were hiring. And it was just sad. I remember coming home and like hugging the 3 boys that I was taking care of that time because I just could not imagine my life without them. Boys that to this day, and that's over 10 years ago, I still see and I love. Since then, the Krim had managed to have 2 more wonderful children, Felix and Linus. As Kevin puts it, while a loss in the criminal justice process hung over us, Marina and I began to rebuild and to make sure that our tough, vibrant Nessie, our little dynamo who had been sandwiched so tightly between Lulu and Leo, did not grow up alone. And I found this statement on a Medium post that he had written, and it was so powerful because a lot of people did say like, hey, how were you able to have more children after such a big loss? And they did it the best way they knew how. Nessa, if you guys remembered, probably saw her sister and her brother that time where she started to cry, and it broke the silence that eventually had Ortega start, stabbing herself. So it's really, really not hard to imagine or think that she went through something so traumatizing that I wouldn't be surprised if she's currently in some form of therapy. And that's hard. And the idea of making sure she's not alone, it's powerful. It's amazing. The Krim family went through a lot, and I'm hoping that you guys take the time and you never forget this story, and if you can, to donate to the Lulu and Leo Fund. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you for your time. Leave a comment on your thoughts on the case. Let me know if you guys were around or if you've heard about it before, what your thoughts are. And again, don't forget to donate to the Lulu and Leo Fund. Join me next time when we talk about a screensaver that led to a murder on Birth of a Criminal. Have a great day, and please be safe.